Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this presentation. My name is Selvi Nafisa Shahab from Universitas Indonesia. Today, I would like to present our narrative review about the hidden threat of multi-drug-resistant bacteria behind the COVID-19 pandemic situation. This is the outline for my presentation. By the end of 2019, COVID-19 has been spread in Wuhan, China. In a short while, the disease spread all over the world, resulting in a pandemic since the beginning of 2020. The main target of this disease is the respiratory system, leading to respiratory distress. Most patients with respiratory distress require hospitalizations. In this case, not only the respiratory distress, the patient must face another life-threatening condition, the risk of healthcare-associated infections, or HAIs. This is the situation here in Jakarta during the second wave of COVID-19. The hospitals were very full that we need to make special tents to accommodate more patients. The increasing number of patients require hospitalizations, causing overcrowding in the hospital and decreasing nurse-to-patient ratio. The frequent need for invasive life support procedures, including mechanical ventilation, predispose the patients with COVID-19 to a high risk of HAIs. This was Dr. Gesti. She was a doctor and she died because of bacterial sepsis when she was treated for COVID-19 in the ICU. She's actually not the only one. Almost 20% of disease COVID-19 patients died because of secondary infections. In this presentation, I would like to share the overview of HAIs caused by MDR bacteria that might be neglected in the COVID-19 patients. I will also explain potential measures that we can do to avoid other similar cases as Dr. Kestis. As we know, COVID-19 is a disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 infection. SARS-CoV-2 firstly getting inside a human's body by inhalation. The inhaled SARS-CoV-2 then getting into the nose and throat to target the epithelial cells. There, SARS-CoV-2 binds to angiotensin-converting enzyme 2. In other viral infection, our body will respond to these infections through our immune system. Both acquired and adaptive immune responses will be needed to get rid of the virus. Adaptive immune system mainly consists of lymphocytes, will provide stronger and longer protection. However, in patients with COVID-19, the patients have lower lymphocyte count with limited functional lymphocytes. This is showing how the SARS-CoV-2 weakened the immune system and therefore making the patients more susceptible to other infections. Healthcare-associated infections are infections occur more than or equal to 48 hours after hospital admission. It can be occurred in the forms of ventilator-associated pneumonia, healthcare-associated pneumonia, catheter line-associated bloodstream infections, catheter-associated urinary tract infections, and surgical site infections. The design of this study is narrative review. We did a search of the literature using broad-based search criteria with the keywords of healthcare-associated infections, COVID-19, and MDR bacteria. We included studies with any design and not limited by language, date, and country of publication. From our search strategy, we got 256 articles, and then we include 15 selected articles. This is the characteristics of the studies covering severe and moderate to severe COVID-19. The most often reported HAI is ventilator-associated pneumonia, followed by healthcare-associated pneumonia and bloodstream infections. This is the prevalence of MDR bacterial infections in patients with COVID-19. The most often reported pathogen is Klebsiella pneumoniae, followed by Acinetobacter baumannii, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella species, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. In patients with COVID-19, HIIs are often neglected. This is because the HIIs may show the similar sign as COVID-19 itself. It is also difficult to determine whether the bacteria we found is the pathogen or just contamination or colonization. For example, the most common etiology of bloodstream infections in patients with COVID-19 are intestinal commensals. HAIs in hospitalized patients is between 3.6 to 46%. The prevalence of HAIs in ICU patients is between 30.3 to 67%. The prevalence of VAP in patients with mechanical ventilation is between 40.2 to 53.8%, with the mortality rate range between 19 to 34%. And most isolated bacteria causing VAP are MDR. MDR bacterial infections are more often in patients with COVID-19 compared with those without COVID-19. The prevalence of MDR bacteria infections in hospitalized patients is between 0.6 to 35.1%. In the ICU, the prevalence is between 4.2 to 50%. And in patients with mechanical ventilation, the prevalence is between 10.6 to 46%. Since VAP is the most common HAIs, VIP bundles need special attention in patients with COVID-19. Hand hygiene is also important in order to prevent the spread of MDR bacteria. The use of masks actually decreasing the MDR bacteria, especially VRE and MRSA. However, the use of gloves make the healthcare workers no longer adhere to the hand hygiene rules, so it can spreading the MDR bacteria. Hospital overcrowding leading to suboptimal care of the patients, and it also leads to poor infection control, declined nurse-to-patient ratio. Some studies even suggest that hospital overcrowding may doubling the HIIs. The rate of bacterial community-acquired infection is very low in COVID-19. However, more than one-third patients receive empirical antibacterial treatment at admission. This broad use of antibiotics may cause higher prevalence of MDR bacteria. For instance, a study suggests that high number of VRE in patients with COVID-19 was associated with the overuse of antibiotics. In conclusion, the prevalence of MDR HIIs is higher in patients with COVID-19. The most common HIIs is VAP. Klebsiella pneumoniae is the most prevalent MDR bacteria causing HIIs in patients with COVID-19. HII bundles need to be carefully implemented in the patients with COVID-19, especially the VAP bundles. Good hand hygiene practices need to be implemented every time. Overcrowded hospitals need to be aware of the risk of MDR bacterial HAI, and we must take care of antibiotic use in monition in patients with COVID-19. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.